Hi, I'm Maria Kessler, one of the master's students working on the Battle for the Belt 2.0, or the replant study, on the soybean side of things. Today we're here with Dr. Pierce Paul. Dr. Paul, what's your position here at OSU?
Right, I'm Pierce, professor and chair in the Department of Plant Pathology. I spend most of my time working as chair in the department, but I still do some work looking at diseases of corn and wheat. So I'm a corn and wheat pathologist, or for short, the cereal pathologist in the department.
So the Battle for the Belt study is looking at planting date and corn hybrid. The Battle for the Belt 2.0 study is looking at planting date and seeding rate. These factors, planting date, hybrid, and seeding rate, how might they impact disease progression in corn?
Okay. So I think the Battle for the Belt study is very, very important, very relevant, and asking very important questions to address questions raised by our stakeholders. But I think the team is doing a fabulous job of asking additional questions, because as you change cropping practices, you change planting date, you change seeding rate, you can impact other factors such as diseases. And if you think about how diseases develop when conditions are favorable for high relative humidity in a plant. So you would think if you increase the seeding rate, you're likely going to have more problems with certain types of diseases if you've got more dense canopy and you've got more higher relative humidity in the plant. The same thing can be said for planting dates. Planting dates coincide with conditions that are favorable or less favorable for some diseases. Typically, if you move your planting date back, you're probably favoring conditions for gray leaf spot, for example, or for tar spot, because most of these diseases start developing best mid-July, early August. And if you push the planting date back so that the susceptible growth stage coincide with these favorable weather conditions, you can have more diseases. So I think the important thing is to ask these questions and be vigilant in terms of scouting field, looking for diseases, and then making fungicide decisions based on whatever you're doing in your field.
Right, yeah. So when scouting, there's often the term that comes up, severity or incidence. Can you briefly describe the difference between those?
Yeah, so severity is a better measure of disease in terms of its impact on yield and quality. It measures the percentage of a plant leaf disease. For example, if you're looking at this leaf here and you've got half of the leaf disease, that's 50% severity. If you've got a quarter of the leaf with lesions of the disease, gray leaf spot or northern corn leaf blight or tar spot, is 25% severity. So that's severity. So you look at every single plant, and if you're looking just at the ear leaf, you quantify how much disease, what percentage of that ear leaf is damaged by the disease, and it gives you percent severity. If you're looking at incidence, then you look at every single plant, but again, instead of looking at what percentage of that plant is diseased, again, if you're looking at the ear leaf, if it has one lesion, one spot, it's diseased. If it has two spots, it's still diseased. So it gets a score of 1. So the idea behind incidence is if it's disease or not. It's not how much disease, but whether or not it's disease. And then you walk the whole plot and you give it an average incidence score is 10 out of 50 plants diseased, you get a percent incidence. And on those 10 plants that are diseased, what percentage of those leaves are diseased give you percent severity? Good question.
What are some of the most common diseases we see here in Ohio on corn?
In Ohio, gray leaf spot, I still think is the most prevalent and most frequently occurring disease in the state. Northern corn leaf blight, depending on the weather conditions. Tar spot is of increasing concern, especially in northeast Ohio. Rust in southern Ohio, you can see rust from time to time, and this is both common rust and southern rust. Air rats. Air rats have increased in prevalence over the last several years. Different parts of the state, some part of the state is always affected every year, not always at the same level. And with air rats, you've got grain contamination with mycotoxins. So those are probably the top ones you should focus on in terms of selecting your hybrids and applying a fungicide.
You mentioned the mycotoxins. Some rods are producing those mycotoxins. Could you list some of those mycotoxins and why they might cause some harmful issues further on post-harvest?
Right, so Gibberella air rat is associated with the production of dioxinivalinol, or we call it DON, D-O-N, or the common name that growers use would be vomitoxin. And just by the name, it should tell you the effects it has on animals. Swine are particularly sensitive. It causes vomiting, it causes feed refusal, low weight gain, low performance of animals in general. Those are just some of the effects. The same fungus that causes Gibberella air rat also produces zearalenone. Zearalenone is a second mycotoxin that's produced by the same fungus, and this one it's a false estrogen. It's a false estrogen, so it messes up the reproductive cycle of animals as well. And you've got a slew of other toxins, but the ones we find most frequently in Ohio is zearalenone and DON or vomitoxin. With Fusarium aerate, that's a different aerate from Gibberella aerate, that's associated with fumonisin. Fumonisin is a problem if you're feeding horses. It's a toxin that causes problem in horses. And if you've got a drought-like year, you can have Aspergillus aerate that produces aflatoxins. So we can go on and on, just talking about all these different types of toxins. But the primary ones in Ohio, I would say vomitoxin, zearalenone, fumonisin, and then if you've got a drought-like year in like 2012, you're going to have some problems with aflatoxin.
And when should farmers consider fungicide applications, and what helps determine this timing?
Right. Fungicide application timing should depend on what your disease target is, whether you've got a susceptible or resistant variety planted or hybrid planted, and then weather conditions. We try to develop forecasting systems to help people decide, okay, is the conditions favorable for disease? In a year like this where it's raining every other day, it's a no-brainer. Conditions have been favorable for diseases throughout the season so far, so much so that planting has been delayed. Typically in a year where planting is delayed, it's probably because it's too wet and conditions are favorable. So weather conditions should be one. If you've got a susceptible hybrid, you should plan to apply a fungicide. And if you're in a field that has a history of the disease, a river bottom field, close to the woods, you should plan to apply a fungicide. What you apply should depend on which disease you're most concerned about. If you've got susceptibility to gray leaf spot, but you've got resistance to northern corn leaf blight, then focus on a fungicide that's good for gray leaf spot. The same deal, if you've got susceptibility to gray leaf spot or to tar spot, focus on a fungicide that's better for tar spot. But in general, one well-timed application at that silking growth stage, that R1, would do a decent job of controlling most of these diseases. But the choice of fungicide is what's important.
Right. And lastly, you mentioned those disease forecasting models. Could you talk a little bit about what those are and how we can utilize them to our benefit?
Right, so the disease forecasting models, if you look at the Crop Protection Network website, there's a model up there for tar spot, and there's a model up there for gray leaf spot. We are working through the Ohio Corn and Wheat Growers Association to develop a model for vomitoxin. We've got models developed, it's not deployed yet. But the idea behind those models is to look at the weather conditions before that silking or that critical growth stage and see if those weather conditions are favorable, and then use those weather conditions to predict the likelihood or the chance of having vomitoxin contamination of grain, gray leaf spot development, tar spot development. And once you have that information, then it helps you to make an informed decision as to whether you should spend money and apply a fungicide. In a nutshell, that's what they do. Okay?
Thank you so much for your time today.
No problem. Thank you.